Thank you everyone for joining tonight's session, Teaching the Struggling Student with our instructor, Diana Black-Kennedy. My name is Carrie Williams. I'm the Communications Information Officer here at Extension. I'm fortunate to be joined by two special colleagues. I have Jennifer Pittman with us tonight. She's our Assistant Director of the Marketing Department. We also have Sharmila Roy with us. Sharmila is an instructor and chair in the Educational Therapy Certificate Program. Let me give you a quick sense of what you can expect tonight. The first 45 minutes are going to be dedicated to Diana and Sharmila's presentation, and then we're hoping to open up that last 15-minute slot for your questions. As I said, we have a lot of material we're hoping to cover, so if we could save questions to the very end, that would be ideal, but you can go ahead and enter them into the chat as they come to you, and then we'll do our best to knock them off as soon as we open up the Q&A portion. A couple last minute housekeeping. If for some reason we can't get to your question tonight, you can always email us at extension@ucsc.edu. Someone will be in touch with you in the next, I think, 24 hours. And we are recording tonight's session, so be on the lookout in the coming days for that follow-up message. That'll have a link to your recording, as well as some follow-up materials that we think will be a nice complement to tonight's conversation. So with that, let me hand things over to Sharmila, and she'll kick us off.
Hi there, I am Sharmila Roy. I am chair of the Educational Therapy Program, and I'm very excited to be here with Diana Kennedy, and we go back a long way. I will introduce just how illustrious she is in a minute, but let me tell you a little bit about our program. It is currently the only educational therapy program that is offered in the Silicon Valley. And we are very accessible. You can register for any course online, and our courses are taught with current research-based knowledge and strategies by very experienced and well-known practitioners in the field. We are an AET, Association of Educational Therapists. We are an approved AET program, which is a big deal. And so what happens is our graduates get fast-tracked into the associate level of membership. So that is one good thing. And also you self-pace your courses because they are offered in many formats. Some hybrid online, some are synchronous, some are asynchronous. And as I said, we are very blessed to have such luminaries in the field, such as Diana Kennedy, who is a graduate herself of this program, to come back and give back and share her wealth of experience with all of you. And so having said that about the program, please do reach out to our student services for any of your questions. Now on to our webinar. The topic is teaching the struggling student. We know many of them. So how do you kind of wrap your head around that fact that so many of them are struggling with reading, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, dyscalculia. About 1 in 5 students in the US has a learning challenge, and most of them are in the general education classroom. So how do you support their needs and meet the needs of the rest of your students without going crazy? So Diana Black-Kennedy is a board certified educational therapist with a thriving private practice. She's taught for 10 years in a wide range of classrooms and is in her 12th year working one-on-one with students. Diana holds a certificate in educational therapy, a master's in education, and a master's in literature. She presents and provides professional development nationally and internationally and teaches in the UCSC Educational Therapy Program. She also has a blog, and I'm sure she'll share that information in her slide deck. Having said that, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Diana Black Kennedy. Diana, over to you.
Thanks, Sharmila. Yeah, we go back a ways. In fact, Sharmila was one of my teachers at UCSC. And for some reason, it took her a while to get organized to apply to AET. And at that moment, I was on the membership committee and I had to recuse myself because I was like, there's no way I can be objective about my teacher. So when she called me and said, hey, we have an opening, I was really excited. So yes, this is teaching the struggling student how to think like an educational therapist. Now, I have to say that this is the briefest tip of the iceberg. And hopefully it whets your appetite and you end up deciding that you want to take classes. So if you are left with more questions than answers, that's good. And also there's no way I could answer all your questions in 45 minutes. So I am a member of the Association of Educational Therapists. This is the official association of educational therapists, as is shown in the name. And some of these slides are given permission to me through a really awesome listserv called Spell Talk. The information is here and it's pretty amazing, free to sign up. And I highly suggest you do it. And some of these slides are from them. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to start briefly with my journey into ET-hood, talk again briefly about the neuroanatomy of learning, the big 4 learning challenges, what students need, and end with adding back joy, because goodness knows we need it in our classrooms and in our lives, as do our students. So my journey. So I was born in New Mexico. Don't worry, I won't go through too much detail. I went to school to college at Northwestern in Illinois, and I was a double major in radio, television, film, and comparative literature, which of course leads to all sorts of high-paying jobs, comparative literature. Not really. So I decided I would go become a professor of literature at Bloomington, Indiana, because I really wanted to help people. I was raised with the ethic that you give back, you help students. While I was there were 2 things going on. One, postmodernism was all the rage, which if you know anything about it, you can roll your eyes right now. It was the big intellectual thing. It was really annoying at the time. I remember reading an article that said that advertising was the paratactic seriality of illimitable choice. That was about when I decided I didn't want to continue on for my PhD. At the same time, I also realized that if you're working at the college level, then most of the kids who are there are the success stories. And I really wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. Now, since then, I've learned a lot about the fact that a lot of new college, first people going to college in their family or of different minorities have trouble graduating college. I didn't realize that. So I knew I wanted to work with children. I didn't know exactly how, so I decided to join Teach for America. And after 5 weeks of training, fabulous 5 full weeks of training, I was sent to rural Mississippi, a place called Ruralville, which was 4 hours south of Memphis, 4 hours north of Jackson, Mississippi, 40 minutes to the east of the Mississippi River, which put it officially in the middle of nowhere. And I taught high school there. And a lot of my students there had second, third grade reading levels. So at the end of the 2 years, I decided a couple things. One, I wanted to keep working as a teacher. Two, I wanted to actually know what I was doing and get more knowledge and experience. Three, I wanted to work with younger kids because I reasoned that if the kids had gotten really good teachers early on, then they wouldn't be in high school with a third grade reading level. And four, I needed to go to the most opposite of Mississippi place possible. So I went to UC Berkeley. That's where I got my graduate degree in education. And I started teaching elementary school from Berkeley. I went to a small charter school in the Fruitvale district of Oakland, which was all Hispanic kids, almost all new immigrant parents. And what I found was my degree at Berkeley gave me enough information to recognize the special needs in my classroom without giving me the information of what to do about it. So I remember my first year thinking, oh my gosh, like this many kids have ADHD. And I knew enough to be able to recognize it and to talk to the parents. I was at a charter school. It was small and new, so there was no learning specialist. So I started taking classes on ADHD. The next year, I had a class where I thought, I've got like 3 or 4 kids I think have dyslexia. Same thing. We still didn't have a learning specialist. And I really didn't feel like I knew what to do to help them. So I started taking classes on that. At that point, I moved to the second largest public school in Oakland, which has now been taken over by the state and split into 2 schools. It was pretty dysfunctional. At that point, I worked with almost all African-American kids. It's interesting, I've taught in rural Mississippi, I've taught in 2 different schools in Oakland, I've taught in a school in Foster City, and I have never taught in a actually desegregated school. So there I continued to struggle with the kids I had in my class, and I continued to take classes because I really wanted to know how to teach the kids. At that point, I decided that my little white self did not do very well with classroom management in a culture so different than mine. So I moved to a small private Jewish day school in Foster City, and lo and behold, there were still learning disabilities despite all the privilege. I say I went from underprivileged to overprivileged kids, and a lot of kids on the spectrum. So at that point, I started taking classes in that. And that's when I discovered educational therapy. And I thought, okay, this will give me an overarching view of what all of these kids need. So I started having a reputation for being able to work with the kids with learning disabilities and a reputation for being able to work with the kids who are gifted. And so my classroom started turning into this weird bifurcated thing where I had the gifted kids and I had the learning disability kids, kids with learning disabilities. And I knew what I needed to do for each of them. And I tried to differentiate as much as I could. I also had a middle, right? You end up with everything. But it was frustrating because as much as I could differentiate, I couldn't fully give any one kid what they needed. Meanwhile, I finished my certificate at UCSC's education program, and my husband got a job up in Marin. And so we moved up there, and that's when I started my private practice, 2009, believe it or not. I can't believe it. And I want to say one of the best things about it that I love the most is you're working with one kid at a time. So you can really take everything you know and focus really deeply on what does that one kid need. You know, in the classroom, when you have a kid who needs to get up and move around, you've got to negotiate that with the fact that there are a whole bunch of other kids who might be distracted. If I've got a kid who's twice exceptional, gifted with learning disabilities, I can aim at both pieces without having to worry about the rest of the class. So I really love it. And if you're in the classroom and you're frustrated by that, I would definitely say think about educational therapy, because you can focus, and also you don't have to do report cards and you get paid more, but it's really about the kids. Okay, so that was my journey. Neuroanatomy of learning. As an educational therapist, you really need to understand the processes behind learning. You don't need to memorize all the pieces of the brain, but you need to understand the processes so that you can help analyze and target the special needs of each kid. So one of the most important things to realize when we're talking about teaching literacy, which is what I teach, is that oral language is hardwired in the brain. There are two parts of your brain that are hardwired through evolution in order to process language. The back Wernicke's processes incoming language, the receptive language. It's right near your ear, your auditory cortex, which makes sense because for hearing people, that's where they get their language. Broca's area is hardwired through evolution to process expressive language, to help you talk and say things out loud. And it's right near the motor cortex, which makes sense because it has to make your mouth move to say those words. Oh, here we go. I've already said that. Thoughts to words near the motor cortex, Wernicke's, language comprehension, auditory thing. Well, the thing is that reading and writing is such a drop in the bucket, evolutionary speaking. It's only 5,000 years old, that it is not hardwired in the brain. There is no place in your brain made to learn reading and writing. Oral language so hardwired in the brain that you can't choose not to learn it if you're exposed to it. You just will learn it. Now, there can be glitches all the way along the way, and that's where some learning disabilities happen, but you're going to learn it. Reading and writing has to be explicitly taught. And what happens is through really good, high quality instruction, you actually rewire parts of the brain, wire them together to make a reading and a writing circuit. So you need to link in the visual piece to see the letters. There's a place near the visual, or as part of the visual part, that is where letters are stored and processed. You need to link that to, do I have it here? And why did I lose this? Hold on. Okay, the visual system, that you've got to link that to your expressive writing system. You've got to link it also to your receptive writing system, language system. Reading and writing, especially writing, take an enormous amount of executive function. You have to wire that into, and you need, for writing at least, to work it into your motor system for your hand, and for reading. Now, for oral language, you need it in your mouth. There is also a place in the brain that's hardwired for math, interestingly enough. It's called the number module. It's in the parietal lobes, which is back here. It is hardwired through evolution for detecting, comparing, and manipulating numerosity parameters. So it's not specific numbers. It's not like 52 or 398, but it's general parameters. And even birds and fish have this. They even train fish to be able to recognize odd and even numbers up to like 8, because they're fish. But crows can count up to, I don't know, in the 30s, and know when, if there are people in a building, they can tell as they come out if all of them have come out or not. So the brain hardwired for oral language, hardwired for some math, not specific, but some math, and representing and retrieving the arithmetical knowledge, not numbers higher than about 10, but in general. Reading and writing and specific math have to be taught because there's no place there. Okay, when we think about learning, and we especially think about learning disabilities, there are domain-specific areas. That's the hard wiring. So domain specific means if we're talking about writing, it's writing specific. If we're talking about reading, it's reading specific. Talking about math, math specific. If there are issues in the language processing parts and they're not phonological, they're somewhere else, not about hearing the sounds in a language, then that's going to indicate specific language impairment, SLI. If they're phonological, that is about processing the sounds in a language, then if that's glitchy, we're going to be implicating, gosh, this thing keeps stopping, dyslexia. And of course, if the number module is glitchy, then that's going to implicate dyscalculia, pretty severe dyscalculia. Well, there are also domain general processes in the brain that have a lot to do with learning disability. Domain general meaning they're just there, and they are basic processes that cut across many, many tasks. And that's where you get the overlaps between different learning disabilities. That's where you get a lot of the ADHD and some of the autism specific pieces. Okay, that's the tip of the iceberg on that. So I want to introduce you to the big 4 learning challenges. There are more, but these are the ones that you probably have in your classroom if you're a classroom teacher, and certainly the ones you'll see as an educational therapist. So dyslexia and specific language impairment are by far the most common ones. There's somewhere, depending on how you judge the dyslexia and what bar you have set to, bad reader versus dyslexia, or not bad, weak reader, somewhere between 5 to 20%. So think about that. If you have a classroom of 20 kids, that means somewhere, I'm thinking 5% is between 1 and 4 of your kids probably have dyslexia. Dyscalculia, almost as common as the more severe form of dyslexia, about 6% of your kids. In a school of 100 kids, that means 6 of them probably have dyscalculia. ADHD, more. So in your 20-person class, you probably have 2 of them who have ADHD. Autism spectrum disorder, much more rare, but still 2.5%. I was going to say 2.5 kids. That 0.5 kid is, really in trouble. I believe that autism spectrum disorder, though, is a higher concentration here in the Bay Area, probably because of Silicon Valley, because suddenly being able to focus for 20 hours on computer programming and language is a benefit when you're working on that. So here's my picture representing what I sort of just went over. So here are the specific 4 learning disabilities. Now notice there's a lot of overlap, what we often call comorbidity, which sounds really depressing, or co-occurrence. All of that is affected and sort of lying on a base of executive functioning. When I say executive functioning, it's the main weakness in ADHD. So I'm also talking about, when we get to it, about ADHD and what ADHD is. The background of all of that, of all learning, any implicit learning that human brains do, is statistical procedural learning. We're going to get into detail about these things in a sec. And that entire structure is really on the pillars, being held up by the pillars of working memory and processing speed. So let's talk about statistical and procedural learning. This is a computational process in the brain that extracts regularities from quasi-regular systems. So for instance, when you're talking to a baby and you say, daddy, daddy, whatever, you say it a million times, it sounds slightly differently each time. So the statistical learning is the piece of the brain that goes, oh, you know what, that's daddy. Now, it's not exactly daddy each time, but I can get what the regularities from that system. The statistical learning also applies statistical knowledge to predict future events. So for instance, when you're spelling and you've read a whole bunch and you think, how do you spell drive? And this has happened with students. They go drive, you know, just a little sloppy in the tongue, and they go, oh, it's J-R-I-V-E. Well, if their statistical learning system is really working well, their brain is going to say, have I ever in my life seen J-R in a word? Not to mention at the beginning of a word, no, then that's probably not how you spell it. It also extracts organizing principles from a set of inputs. So it gets that generalization and that categorization. So think social skills and text structures. So as you're socializing with people, you kind of figure out your organizing principles. You're getting a whole bunch of input, you're watching people, you're talking to people. Now, we know that kids on the spectrum tend to be very weak in their social skills. So they haven't been able to figure out that organizing principle. Same thing with text structures. You read a lot of stories, storybooks, your parents read to you. If you can figure out the organizing principles, you're way ahead of the game. If your statistical learning is weak and you haven't done that, then you're kind of lost when then the teacher says, write a story. So statistical learning is an implicit learning mechanism. Nobody has to teach you these things explicitly. You get it by exposure. Here's the key. The more learning disabled a student is, the less they're going to infer rules and patterns and regularities for themselves. So where the highest kids in the class might pick those things up on their own, these kiddos won't. And because of that, the more explicit their instruction needs to be. If you think about it in terms of the nice bell curve in your class, these kids up here, let's talk about literacy learning, right? These kids up here are the ones that I call the, you know, put them in a closet with Harry Potter and Dr. Seuss. They come out at the end of first grade reading better than everybody else because they just picked it up. They picked it up all through their own implicit learning. They really don't need really good really good techniques at all. These kids here do pretty well picking it up with just basic instruction. These are the ones that make us feel so good as a teacher because we don't even need to do a very good job. And we're like, see, they're learning. Yay, I'm such a good teacher. Turns out it's because they're good learners. This whole big group at the top, when we're talking about literacy instruction, they need a really good structured literacy program, science of reading, explicit, systematic, multisensory phonics and beyond phonics instruction in order to do well. These kids, the further down they get, the more learning disabled they are, the more dyslexic they are, the more desperately they need that. And they don't just need it, they need it at a higher dosage and they need it more intensively. Okay, statistical procedural learning, working memory. I love this. Could you not teach too much today? I'm running low on available memory. I felt like this today. Actually, one of my students said, oh yeah, my birthday was the last week of April. And I said, did I say happy birthday? And she's like, yeah. I was like, oh, good, but I didn't remember. So working memory is the workspace in the brain. It is your available desktop, right? It's limited. It's basically what's going to be there around 7 seconds. I used to say it was the part that memorized the phone number when you saw it and then dialed it, but we don't do that anymore. So think of it as when you get your Google sign-in code and you go 5789, and then you have to type 5789. That's its working and working memory. It also pulls from long-term memory, whatever it needs for immediate use. It cannot be, your memories cannot be manipulated or used unless they're in working memory. And it also helps store things back into long-term memory. The problem is some kids have weak working memory. In fact, almost every learning disability has weak working memory. And that basically means their table is really small. And once it's really small, it affects everything. It makes everything harder. It makes mapping phonemes onto graphemes harder, partially because you need like A, the letter A, and sounds ah on that table at the same time. If they're on the table at the same time, they connect neurally. If you have A and then this falls off and you have ah, they literally don't connect. So it makes learning math problems also harder for the same reason. Memorizing and executing math procedures, if you think about those kids with long division who like have to stop to figure out, well, what is 7 times 3? Then they come back and they're like, ah, where am I? I don't remember what to do. Oh my gosh. Working memory affects writing at every level, not just spelling, but organizing, adding detail, figuring out where you are, text structure, all of that stuff, everything it affects. Now that I'm 53, I notice how much more it affects me. Right? I don't know if you guys are my age, but I really want Bono from U2 to rewrite a song and make it. And I still haven't grabbed what I was looking for. I don't know about you guys, you might be young, but I go into the room, I go, why am I here? I go back, I go, oh, I needed this. I go back. Wait, why was I here? It's terrible. That's working memory. Okay, processing speed. It's not what I'm doing right now, trying to go fast, but processing speed is exactly what it sounds like. It is how fast your brain processes things. We're talking on the millisecond neural firing kind of position. We're not necessarily talking about the pokey little puppy. So here we go. Downloading answer, estimating time. 4.14. And you can see these kids because you go, what is 7 times 3? And you know they know it. And they go, 21. And you can almost see the gears in their head turning. Every once in a while, my keyboard stops working. This processing speed is almost always part of dyslexia and ADHD. And it affects the decay rate in working memory. Remember, you have to have A and A in working memory at the same time. If it's too small, you go A says A, but if it's too slow, it also says A says A. So it can lead to the same problems and make working memory weaknesses worse, which is why one of the reasons they often come at the same time. This affects efficiency at every single step. Remember I said it's like milliseconds in the brain, but that really builds up and makes the whole thing worse. So thinking of an idea takes longer, putting that idea into words, getting those words onto the paper, everything takes longer. Processing speed, fluency in reading, fluency in writing, fluency in math, all of that is about processing speed. Now, one of the problems, and this is going to be, especially if you're a classroom teacher, one of the hugest things you can do right now, Monday, to make your kids with learning disabilities feel so much better and so much more successful, stop having timed tests, multiplication tests especially. Because a lot of times the reason we have multiplication tests where you have to get through like 103 minutes is we say, you know, that's how I know that they're automatic. How else will I know they're automatic if I don't see them do it fast? So it's not that we really think, oh, you need to be able to do math facts fast. It's that we want to make sure they know them without counting on their fingers. If you have slow processing speed, this is a terrible proxy for automaticity because you can know them fast and down cold. Sorry, you can know them down cold and still have it take a while to come up. And to make matters worse, research has linked torturous time testing to underachievement in math. In fact, it can create math anxiety where there is no math anxiety before. So if you want to do something right away to help your kids, especially the ones with learning disabilities, stop doing time tests. There's better ways to make sure they're fluent anyway. Okay, let's go on to executive functioning. Oh my God, are we running out of time? See, I told you guys this was the tip of the iceberg. Okay, executive functioning, we're talking about ADHD. We're also talking about the weakness that goes into ADHD. So decoding and encoding. Your executive functioning has to figure out how to read a word. I'm going to go through this. Your comprehension is about executive functioning, the efficient use of strategies and all your active reading. Your detail analysis in math. You know those kids who know the math but then miss half a point on every single question on the test? That's detail analysis. Writing is huge for executive functioning. Analysis of process, initiating the writing, shifting from one thing to another. Effortful control of attention, where all of a sudden you're like squirrel. Poor inhibition of irrelevant associations. You're trying to write about the American Revolution and suddenly you're thinking about lunch. All of that also clutters working memory and further limits it. You can't you have weak self-monitoring with ADHD. That takes effortful attention. You have weak emotional regulation when you have weak executive functioning. Your frustration tolerance is higher. Your boredom tolerance is lower. You have weak emotional regulation because you don't have enough space to hold multiple emotions and your self-talk at the same time. In ADHD, there's a thing called reward deficiency syndrome where you don't feel rewarded as easily because that takes dopamine. You don't have enough dopamine. You're more sensitive to rejection when you have ADHD. Okay, dyslexia. I'm not going to read the inspirational quotes. One of the things to think about when you're analyzing a kid to figure out what you need to do to help them is think about this simple view of reading, super important. There's word recognition, that is decoding. There's oral language comprehension, and those both have to be strong to lead to reading comprehension. If either one is weak, you're going to have weak reading comprehension. So as an ed therapist, you don't just look at a reading comprehension test and go, oh, it's blah, because you're not sure what it is. You have to be able to figure out what it is. This is the reading rope, which just expands upon that. So, okay, we're going to zoom through what it takes to read super fast. And I'm sorry I'm going so fast. You've got decoding, that's phonics, that's morphology, that's your mental orthographic image of the word that you have to read. Your executive functioning chooses which one to use. Your oral language comprehension, putting words into pictures. You see a word, it triggers a picture. That means you go from words in your left hemisphere to images in your right hemisphere. You also need to process the semantics of a word. That's in your Wernicke's section. You need to process syntax. That's organizing grammar and sentence structure. You need to monitor your comprehension. That takes metacognition, which takes executive functioning. It takes attention so that you even notice you're not paying attention. That's all that. You need to know what to do when you decide, you know what, I didn't understand what I just did. You need to know when and how to apply these fix-up strategies. That takes metacognition and more executive functioning. Every single step is a potential roadblock affected by some learning disability. And as an ET, one of the pieces of training is to learn what those roadblocks are and how you can tell that they're happening. Writing demands the integration of the most processes of any communication act. Even more when you're writing on demand for the teacher, which makes it harder. One, you have to get directions. If they're given orally, that takes auditory processing and language processing and working memory and effortful attention, because we're usually not that exciting when we're giving writing instructions. If they're given written, then you need to decode the words. You have language comprehension, more effortful attention. Once you figure, then you need to figure out what the teacher wants. That takes theory of mind. If you've got autism, or some kids with language impairment, that's weak. You need executive functioning. You need academic background knowledge. What is narrative? What is sensory knowledge, detail? What does the teacher expect if I'm going to write a piece? You need to visualize. That's idea generation, happens on the right side of your brain. You need to change the picture into words, oral language. That's making your ideas into language, is called translation. Online revision. Oh, we didn't mean that. Crossing the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is between the left and the right brain. That can be tricky, especially in autism. Then you need to change it into more words. Translation, again, online revision, corpus callosum. You need to keep going back and forth between the right and left side. Then more words, because of course your teacher isn't happy with you just saying dog. That's more of that. That's more online revision. You have to keep crossing back and forth over and over to pick up more words from those pictures. Then your teacher tells you to be specific. Do you really want to say dog, or you have to say golden retriever? That takes theory of mind, because you have to be able to do that until the teacher is happy. Then you need to use your precise words correctly. You can't just say happy, you have to say joyful, and you need to do it right. You need to know the understanding. You need to be able to revise. You need your morphology for parts of speech. Your oral language has to be strong. That's just phrases. Then you need to be able to connect your words in a logical, grammatically correct sentences. That's syntax, online revision, oral language. Then you need to picture how you write those words. This isn't even writing them yet. You have to picture how to put them into actual words. That's going from the oral language to the written language. That takes your working memory phonological loop, your phonics awareness, phonemic awareness, spelling, all of that piece. Then you have to make your hand write the words. And that takes visual motor integration. And you have to keep remembering all the other words while you're writing each individual one. That's working memory. Then you have to compare what you wrote to what you know about how things are spelled and your phonics. That takes working memory, both auditory and visual. It takes executive functioning. You have to correct them, which is revision and transcription. Visual motor integration, making your hand do that. Working memory, executive functioning. Then you have to repeat. That takes executive functioning, working memory. Then you have to repeat again, and then you have to repeat again. And that is for one sentence. Every step of that is a potential roadblock. And we say, well, we just wanted them to write a paragraph. Oh my gosh. Okay, dyslexia. We're almost out of time. This is so sad. I thought I cut this down enough, you guys. This is just another reason why you need to take my class, because this is just too much information. I could not cut it down enough. Dyslexia is, here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to this thing. Okay, super quick. Dyslexia, it's about phonological awareness. It's the lower part of that reading rope. Specific language impairment is about oral language. For the most part, it's about the top part of that reading rope. It's the oral language piece. Both of these can affect reading and writing, reading comprehension and writing comprehensibility, but for different reasons. Dyscalculia, that's math. That's either all the domain general pieces. ADHD makes it hard to do math. Dyslexia makes it hard to do math, or it's that number module. If that number module is weak, you will know it before they're 4. They'll have trouble even knowing how much is on a die, you know, just by seeing it. And that means they're going to have a lot of trouble with math. Autism spectrum disorder, that's a right hemisphere issue. A lot of times the decoding can be very strong, the reading can be strong, the spelling can be strong, but it's the upper part of the reading rope, the oral language, and especially the verbal reasoning that can get in the way of comprehension. So all of these can get in the way of comprehension, of doing math, but for different reasons. So when you're an educational therapist or a teacher in the classroom, you got to know enough to be able to suss out which one is which, because you're going to treat dyslexia very differently than specific language impairment or autism spectrum disorder. If someone's reading comprehension scores are low because of dyslexia, they don't need help on comprehension, they need help on decoding. If their comprehension is low because of autism spectrum disorder, they often don't need help on decoding. They need help connecting pictures to words and words to pictures. That's a program like Visualize and Verbalize. If they have specific language impairment, they may need a little bit of decoding and encoding help, but mostly they're going to need help on syntax, on semantics. That means vocabulary, that means the grammar, not just circling things, but how to use it, how do you structure sentences. And both autism spectrum and specific language impairment will affect the oral language, where dyslexia is really a print-based issue. I am so sorry, you guys. I didn't even get to the like fun games or anything. But it's time for questions now. I will send out the a PowerPoint handout. You can look through it, and you can email me to say, what did you mean by this, this, and this? Yeah, and then take my class so that you actually get the entire big picture of the whole thing. Okay, I just stopped.
Thanks, Diana. I think we do have a couple questions in the Q&A. First up is, how can I help my child speed up processing time?
Okay, sadly, processing speeds cannot be remediated. If you see a program that says it can, don't trust it. Usually their research is really sketchy. What you can do is help them accommodate it. And also with, for instance, reading and writing, what Marianne Wolf, who came up with the concept of double deficit hypothesis, which means dyslexia can either be phonological or rapid naming. And if it's both, the double deficit, it means it's harder to work with. What she found through her research is that the more connections you have to a word, not just phonics, not just phonological, but morphological, meaning, how it fits into a sentence, all of those pieces, the more are connected to it, the faster it's recalled. So if you can build a really strong, robust semantic map in your kid's brain, they're going to get faster reading, they're going to get faster writing, but they're never going to be super de-duper speedy. So one thing to look at is if there's ADHD, it can look like slow processing speed and actually be effortful attention, in which case try medication to see if it helps. It's the best way to actually see what the issues are if it's ADHD, is to see if they get better. Ellen Bratton, with I think 2 A's, Braten, Sharmila, you can, if you know her, she's done a lot of work and webinars on processing speed. So she would be someone to look for webinars and stuff on YouTube. Do you want to?
Thanks, Diana. Sharmila, did you have anything to add? You wanted to add?
I was typing a question. I was typing an answer to one of the.
Perfect. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sorry, I missed it.
Can I answer I just realized I could open the question and answer.
Oh, great. Yeah, if you've got access, go ahead.
Okay, how can you tell if your fourth grader has dyscalculia? So there is pure math learning disability or dyscalculia, which isn't as common as just having trouble with math. And what causes that is that weakness in the number module. So think about when they were developing as a kid, or think about now, if you put 3 to 5 pennies on the table, do they see how much it is right away? That's called subitizing. If they have to count the 5 instead of just going, oh, it's 5, that's a good indication that they are struggling. Think about their number sense. If you say to your kid, okay, if this is 0 and this is 100, where's 50? Most kids know, okay, it's halfway there. I've got kids who are like, here, they don't have that number sense. That's a good indication that it's pure dyscalculia. On the other hand, if a kid has dyslexia, they're going to have trouble with making those symbol to meaning connections and the words to the symbols connections. That's going to make it hard. Working memory issues are going to make it hard to memorize math facts, hard to remember the procedures. ADHD has a huge effect, usually not on the concepts, the number concepts, but on just detail analysis, making mistakes, memorizing, because ADHD brains get very, very bored very easily and actually make more mistakes on math facts once they get better at them, because their brain is like, ugh, been there, done that. Why should I pay attention? So really think about how much they're struggling and how basic the issue is. And they still need help. Making Math Real, I think, is one of the best programs. Finding someone trained in making math real can really help them. Sharmila teaches a teaching math class at the program. I guess that's about all for right now.
Diana, we have another question. How can I help my child build more working memory?
So working memory, like processing speed, can't actually be remediated. Again, there are programs that say they can. CogMed is one, and they had some research that seemed to indicate it worked, but they were the only ones doing the research, and nobody else could replicate the findings. So there are some things online that promise you the world, oh, we're going to do exercises and help rebuild your child's brain, and suddenly they'll have huge working memory. And that's, none of the research shows that that's possible at this point. So basically what you need to do again is to do the workarounds. For instance, let's take mental math. Some of these programs, Bridges, they want your kid to be able to do all these mental math tricks, which are awesome if they have the working memory. But let's take something like Bridges has this strategy called doubling and halving. So like, oh, if I'm multiplying, I can double one side and halve the other side. So if you have 50 times 42, then you can say, oh, I'm going to do 100 times 21. That takes an enormous amount of working memory. So one of the things we didn't get to was offload memory as much as possible. In fact, the whole reason math algorithms were invented was to offload that memory. So if your kid has weak working memory, don't try to talk to the teacher, don't have them do all those working memory heavy pieces, try to offload the memory. Those are going to be the kids who need the 9 lines or the multiplication pages there. They can memorize them, but until they have them down cold, they need something there so that while they're doing long division, they don't also have to pull up or rediscover that 7 times 3 is 21. And they're just going to take a lot more practice and a lot longer practice. So when you're doing something with a kid with low working memory, you want to keep bringing up practice every week or two. You can't just be like, okay, we're done with that unit, bye, and then expect them to pull it back up at the exam. So more practice, more longer term practice, and offload as much as possible.
Okay, there's one more. I've been doing a lot of practice with my kid, but then they don't have the time to be a kid.
Yeah, right? I mean, this is one of the hugest balances. One thing I would suggest is, if possible, get outside help, an educational therapist or someone, because that way you can protect your relationship with them, and then they can get the extra help they need outside of that, especially once kids get a little older. The problem is that parents are so fundamentally important to a kid, obviously. Not only the love relationship, but you literally, their lives depend on you, that criticism, even if it's constructive, even if it's the most helpful thing in the world, it sounds threatening, and they take it much worse than if a random stranger, even if they get to love me and think I'm great, I'm not going to threaten them. So I tell you, half of my job is telling kids to do what their parents have been telling them to do for a year, and they haven't listened to their parents. But you definitely need to balance out the remediation and the fun and the working, doing things that they love and are strong, because that's going to build the resilience. If you can, get as much as you can done during the school day.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Sharmila.
Yeah, so I'd just like to add is that if you think that they're struggling, it's best to get an evaluation and figure out the strengths. Because right now we are really talking about what your child is not able to do, which is probably memorize math facts, or processing speed or working memory, things that are long-term, that are going to stay with your child for a long time in their life. And they have to learn what their strengths are, so that you can leverage those strengths such as imagination, strengths such as innovation, strengths such as something else, whatever a passion is, and kind of maybe if you focus more on what the strengths are, they will start taking in and absorbing more information, storing more information in long-term memory, be able to recall it better. Try that strategy. But I would strongly recommend that you have some kind of an evaluation done, so that if indeed there are signs of dyscalculia, then, or dyslexia, or any other SLD, at least you'll know what to do about it.
And I would also say, think about front loading work. So the earlier the remediation happens, the bigger an impact it has, and the faster people get caught up. If you're 3 months behind because you're at the end of kindergarten, and you're reading at a mid-kindergarten level, that's going to take a lot less time to build than if you're in 3rd grade reading at a 1st grade level. So you want them to be a kid. I'm not saying like take that away, but as much as possible, do remediation really early. Summer is a fabulous time. I love seeing kids intensively over the summer. They can see me 4 days a week at 9 o'clock in the morning and have the rest of the day free. And then we can really get a lot done to get them ready for when school starts again. So early remediation and front loading that help as much as possible.
I know we're at time. We had one last question in the chat. Is AET Online still the best resource to hire an AET?
Yeah. I think it is. Word of mouth and the AET Online. are both excellent ways, and chat with them. You know, one thing I like telling the teens especially, but all parents and teen kids, because third graders it's not as much an issue, is it's about fit. You know, I had one girl who didn't really like working with me because she didn't like that there was cat poop in the cat box and that I wouldn't kill a spider and clean up its spider web. And her parents were like, I'm so sorry. They made her work with me till the end of the school year. And they were like, we just can't make her go back. She just doesn't like it. And we're sorry. It's so superficial. Well, then a year later, her older brother started working with me, and he went home the first night and was like, I don't know why you didn't like her. She's hilarious. She's so great, you know. And I just, you know, it's about fit. And so talk to people and, you know, even start work and see after a time or 2 or 3 weeks, you know, especially the teenagers, because, you know, you don't want to fight a battle with them. If they click with someone, they're going to learn more.
Great advice. All right, we're a couple minutes over, but Sharmila, Diana, anything you'd like to add before we wrap?
Join our program. Awesome
Yes, thank you.
teachers. I'm shamelessly plugging it because it really is. It's a great program. So we should.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will also say ed therapy, if you're a teacher or if you're thinking of going into it, but like, oh, I don't know if I can make a career out of it. There is so much more need than there are people, partly because you can't scale up. I mean, we got from 3:30 to the last slot you can see people. I can't see people past 6:30. So I can handle 10 to 12 kids a semester. And I got a ton more calls. So I found that if people are good, they fill up right away and stay full, especially the math people, but really everybody. It's really a great career, and sadly it's growing. Sadly, I think have employment for a long time coming.
Oh, looks like we have someone starting in July. That's exciting. Welcome. We look forward to seeing you. All right, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Sharmila, Diana, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and all these important insights. I know we did try to pack a lot into tonight's session. Diana, I'm sorry if we rushed you. But for everyone here, if you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask tonight, or if that comes to you later, you can always email us at extension@ucsc.edu. And as I said, we did record tonight's session, so be on the lookout for that email in the coming days. We're just going to polish things up a bit. When we share that, we'll be sure to share links to Diana and Sharmila's upcoming courses, as well as some links to the program in general. So with that, I'm going to let you go. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Carrie. Good night, everyone.